Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special conversation that's part of the Business Record's Fearless Initiative. I'm Emily Barsky, the editor of the Business Record, and I'll be co-moderating this conversation with our very talented Fearless editor, Emily Kestel. About this time last year, we launched Fearless with a simple goal to help empower Iowa women to succeed in work and life. We set out to produce a free e-newsletter every Monday, content on our Fearless website, monthly coverage in the Business Record, and special events to engage our audience about women's and gender issues through an intersectional lens. Throughout this month, we'll be celebrating this one-year milestone by reflecting on the conversations we've had and the goals that we have moving forward. Fearless is not possible without engaged audience members, sponsors that care about supporting this work, and Iowans willing to share their stories and offer great insight with us, like this panel that we've got here today. We're joined by a great group of panelists from across the state who are going to talk us through some of the top women and gender related issues that we'll see in 2022, and we'll talk about what we can do about them. So with us today, we have Renee Christoffer, President and CEO of Veridian Credit Union, Dr. Beth Livingston, Faculty Director of the Dore Emerging Women Leaders Program and Assistant Professor at the Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa, Don Oliver Wiand, President and CEO of the Iowa Women's Foundation, and Dr. Toyia Youngert, Senior Vice President for Student Affairs at Iowa State University. So we'll kick things off with a pretty broad question. Based on what you all have seen this year, what's one of the top issues that women will face at or outside of work in 2022? And I'll start with you, Renee.
Thank you, Emily. Great question. I think one of the top issues that we will see women facing throughout 2021, the rest of that year here, and then also into next year will be that whole concept of work-life harmony. I think you have so many women that have so much on their plate, added to the plate at home, and then also extremely busy at work, and you have a lot of responsibilities. And so how do we do it all? I think one of the things that women will be challenged with in the future is how do you be all things in all of those arenas? And so some we are seeing are leaving the workforce. And I think us as employers have to determine how we can create an environment where work-life harmony is okay and actually celebrated. And so we want you to be completely engaged, whether that's at work and completely engaged at play. And so I think we need to create that environment. Otherwise, we'll continue to see women getting burnout and leaving the workforce, which is not what any of us want.
Awesome. And Don, what about you?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity to be here today. I totally agree with Renee. The work-life balance is really important, but the issue that I think that's impacting that the most is childcare. And quite honestly, if we don't address the childcare crisis that we're dealing with in our state, more women are not going to be able to make that work-life balance and are going to be leaving the workforce in greater numbers than they already are leaving the workforce.
And Beth, what about you?
Well, I love what both Renee and Dawn have said because they align so much with the reality on the ground of what we're hearing from women when we go out and do this sort of research, but also the trends that have been occurring pre-COVID, which are that women are desiring more control. So we talk about, Renee brought up, work-life harmony. And I think what we're seeing is really the precipitating factor behind that is this desire for some sort of control or autonomy over the way you work and the way you're able to plan your family and non-work life. And this has been made incredibly apparent during the course of the pandemic between those who have jobs who have allowed them to have more say and more control and have in that way shown their trust and respect for their employees versus those who have overmanaged and overpushed in a way that has alienated and isolated a lot of their female employees. I think that this desire for control and this desire to be respected and supported at work will be one of the major issues that we see continuing. And it really does underlie this idea of work-life management, but also diversity, equity, and inclusion, because this idea of how do we respect people? How do we respect and trust women enough to give them some control over how they do their work, where they do their work, and the degree to which they bring their whole self to work is an issue that we'll need to consider. And I think that that also relates to Dawn's point about childcare, because for many of these women, this was not their choice. This was not their control. There were constraints, structural constraints perhaps, but also family related constraints. Who between me and my partner has to make these sorts of choices? Who has the constraints on those choices? And there are structural and institutional forces behind those sorts of things. So I think that we'll see that tension continue, where women are deciding, well, who gets to have the choice over how I live my life and how I do my work? And what am I willing to put up with about having to bring my whole self to work, or being able to do that after I have been able to work from home, for instance, and not had to put up with some of those issues at work, or had more control over my boundaries than I have been able to have in the past.
Toyia, what would you add?
Wow, all three of them took my answer. I love it. Obviously, we are all on the same page, but I think Beth really hit the nail on the head. Particularly when I think about women in the workplace and women at home. We are often managers of both realms. And so how do you manage that? How do you juggle those things? One of the things that we've been talking about, particularly at Iowa State University, is how do we keep up with the trends that we're seeing? We're understanding that the pandemic just sent us all into a tailspin, and a major part of that was working from home. How do you work from home when you work at a major university? How do you work from home when your job is to serve students? And so we recognize that we have to be flexible, but what does that look like, particularly in our field? And so we recognize that in order to be competitive, we do have to allow some flexibility now in the workplace. And this has been a big ask, particularly from the women who work at the university. Many of them have been thrust into unique roles that they weren't anticipating. They have been professional women, they've worked full time, and they have been able to manage and juggle those multiple tasks at home. But the pandemic turned them into butchers, bakers, teachers, and candlestick makers, and they had a lot on their plate, and trying to figure out how to do all of those things in addition to homeschool was probably one of the biggest things that we heard, particularly from women employed at the university. And so I think that this, I remember when I met with a group of students, they said, let's not waste a good pandemic. And I said, what on earth does that mean? But what they were saying was there have been some changes that have taken place that have actually been much needed because of, or in response to, the pandemic. And I think a big piece of that has been the flexibility with work, flexibility with school, flexibility with family. And I think that that's something that has caused all of us to kind of reevaluate ourselves, reevaluate our businesses and our industries, and create new ways in which we can support our employees, particularly women.
Yeah, those are all great responses, and we'll certainly get into more detail on them. But for right now, I want to talk a little bit about gender representation in leadership positions. Last year, Fearless reported that women hold 30% of executive level leadership positions here in the state, and that rate has only risen slightly in the last 10 years. So what are some of the persistent barriers that women face in ascending to those leadership positions? And then what may be some of the new barriers at play as well? And then I'm not sure who to start off with for this one. Beth, do you maybe want to go first?
I'm happy to go first. It's such an honor to be on this panel with women, I think, who are having all of these similar experiences, but across different industries and with different focuses, because I do think that we can see some of this, conflagration of these issues coming together. And I think representation is one of those lagging indicators in some ways that we still have more work to do. And it is not uncommon for us to see in the research this stagnation, particularly when we see, oh, we're making some great strides and then we hit a ceiling. And I think it's one of the issues that I see popping up is this misalignment between understanding what's an individual indicator, so a woman's individual choices or her ambition or what she wants, with these institutional factors, discrimination at work, or a workplace, and not even necessarily just discrimination that can be in the form of, I don't think women are good managers, which that absolutely does happen. I wish it didn't, but that absolutely does happen. But also structural things that make it more difficult for women to do all of what Toyia just said, which is I have to, manage all these things at home and do all of these other roles. And the workplace is not set up for me to be able to be all the things for all the people, as Renee was suggesting earlier. It's not set up for that. And so understanding when we're looking at the outcome, the metric of representation of women at executive levels, what are the actual causal factors that's leading to that? Because that can lead to a misalignment for how organizations seek to change that. Well, we need to coach women on how to be more assertive or how to negotiate better, versus we really need to rethink the autonomy that we give women to do work the way they want to, or provide for different career path choices to get to the top. There's often only one or two career paths to get to those executive levels. Perhaps you need to have international experience, or you need to be a plant manager, or be in a line position. You need to have these specific sorts of experiences, and rethinking what we think a manager is can help that metric, perhaps 2 or 3 years lagged out, but it's the real structural change that I think Toyia mentioned. We have the opportunity right now to really rethink and do and be bold in those sorts of changes. And I think if we can think of representation as one indicator, but not the only indicator, it can help us to get there.
Yeah. Renee, I know that you've had the unique position of really rising up through the ranks at Veridian. Do you want to talk about maybe some of those lived experiences that you've had in what it's like to move up into a leadership position, and then what may be some of the barriers that other women face as well?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I've been at Veridian for 28 years and actually started in an entry-level position. And so I've worked through the retail network from a teller, member service representative, branch manager, vice president. So held a lot of different positions. And I think the true value in that is that it gives me perspective, right? So I know what people are working through. No matter what positions they're in, I can relate, and I understand the challenges. I understand the rewarding pieces of it, and I understand what speaks to people. So it's been extremely valuable in my career. I would also say, as a woman looking for additional opportunities, and I'm always ready for the next challenge and wanting to learn more and grow, what has been extremely helpful for me is having mentors. And a lot of those mentors were men, and they would invest in me, and they would coach, and they would provide me guidance. They've taught me so much. And I think just providing opportunities and the space for me to be in front of a group or part of a project team or leading an initiative, and they gave that to me. So I'm forever grateful for that. But I think it takes a team of individuals surrounding and lifting up our women in our workforces, right? So at Veridian, I'm so fortunate that our management team is 66% women. So we have lived that, and we have created this culture where we invest in each other, we lift each other up, and we're really promoters, and we celebrate your strengths and what you bring to the table. They are definitely different than mine, but together we make a really strong team. So I think continuing to do that, and organizationally, it's very much a structural thing. As Beth was saying, I think it's important that you have the pieces in place where people know that that's okay, that you're going to invite somebody new to the table, you're going to give them this opportunity, or you're going to implement this program that gives people the opportunity to really invest themselves in something and prove that they can do it, and they can excel and grow as a leader and as an individual. I think it's so important that those are things that are just built into your culture. And here at Veridian, I've been the benefit. I have benefited from that being part of who we are. So I love it, and I love that it's continued to evolve for us, and we continue to create women leaders, and have for years. So thank you for the question.
Yeah, thank you. Toyia, I want to turn to you. I think I remember hearing in an earlier panel this year that you were the first woman to serve in your position at Iowa State. So you have that unique experience of being a first. How does that kind of play into being a woman in leadership, and then bringing in those intersectional identities as well?
Well, I love the fact that we're talking about intersectionality, because I think it's so critical, particularly when you talk about representation. And so for the majority of my life and my career, I have been the first and oftentimes the only. And so when you bring together the intersectionality of gender race, sexuality, all the different things that kind of play in together. I have been in numerous positions where I find myself being the first or the only there. And so I am the first woman to ever serve as Senior Vice President for Student Affairs, and I consider it an honor to do so. But I also feel grateful, and it's similar to what Renee said, to be in an environment where we have a lot of women in leadership positions. Our president, Wendy Winterstein, became the first woman president at Iowa State University in 2017. And while it was amazing, if you think about it, it's taken 163 years for that to happen, and so she has done an amazing job of supporting women. And it's not just supporting women, but it's just great people, great leaders across campus, and giving them the opportunity to be elevated, to be promoted in a variety of positions. But I really wanted to talk about the representation piece. That's the one piece that I hear over and over again. Not only am I the first woman to serve as a Senior Vice President of Student Affairs, but I'm the highest ranking person of color on campus. And that means a lot, not only to me, and I bear the weight and responsibility of that, but I hear it all the time, not just from students, but from faculty and staff who said, "Oh my gosh, we were so excited when we were hired. When you were hired, we were so excited to see someone who looks like us." And so I recognize that creates a lot of responsibility for me and to represent, but I also have to be my unique and my authentic self in those situations. And so sometimes I sit at the table, and I think we all have had those experiences where we pause and we want to say something, but we're not quite sure. And then I often struggle because there are some stereotypes about Black women. And I said, if I speak up, are people going to say that I'm the angry Black woman at the table? And so I have to not only think about, is this the right time to speak up, but what I'm going to say and how I'm going to say it. But I'm so pleased to be around so many women leaders. They have made it such a warm welcome, not only to the university, but to Iowa. I've had an opportunity to connect with so many amazing women across the state who are in similar positions, who understand some of the things that we juggle. And so that's why I was so excited to participate in this, because I said, wow, I'm going to be able to have a conversation with people like me who understand, who understand the challenges that we go through being the one or the only or one of few women leaders in our respective fields. And so I'm glad that we're having this conversation and touching not only on the gender piece, but intersectionality as well.
Yeah. Dawn, I'll go to you next. I know that Renee had brought up the topic of mentorship, and I know that mentoring is one of the 6 barriers that the Iowa Women's Foundation identified to women's success and economic self-sufficiency. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, and how mentorship is so important to women in leadership?
Absolutely. So we use research at the Women's Foundation to really guide our work. We don't just wake up one day and say, I think today we're going to look at childcare. We look at research to determine what are the barriers to economic success for women in our state. And mentors was one of them, as you indicated. Women don't just automatically mentor, which to me was interesting. But we don't, because we don't see ourselves as mentors. Men just do it. It's innate, but it's not for women. So it's really important that we take advantage of the opportunities that are given to us when they're there to help mentor, because, and don't wait to be asked. Go ahead and just, try to start doing it, because it really does make a big difference. The Women's Foundation has a wonderful partnership with the Tippie College Women in Business. We also are partnering with UNI's Women in Business. We're looking at Drake, and we would love to start doing something at ISU as well, where we're actually doing events with the young women. We do networking events. We do working the room events. We do, events on, how to talk to each other, how to reach out. I mean, we just really want to be mentors. And honestly, we're, as the women, are benefiting just as much as the young students or the younger students are. So it's really a wonderful opportunity and something that we really encourage people to get involved with and to do. Can I say one more thing? And I was sitting here, I'm sorry, I'm sitting here, I want to go off topic, and I promise not to do this very often, okay? But I just really would like to do this right now. I'm very impressed sitting here, you know, with women who've been able to work their way up and have been able to have that, and that they've had the culture around them to be able to do that. But that doesn't happen everywhere. And research also tells us that businesses that have women in upper positions, upper management positions, and in the C-suite do much better than businesses that don't. So we need to look at the culture. But I have to tell you, something that Toyia said really struck me, and it almost kind of made me sad. And so I just want to highlight it. When she said, and she's sitting at the table and she has to think before she says something, are they going to think I'm that angry Black woman? How sad that she has to think that before she can speak. Do you think men do that? Sorry, you're going to get me on my soapbox, but men don't. Men probably don't even think twice before they say something. They just say it. Things need to change. We need to reframe a lot of this, and we need to really make things better so women do have the opportunities, and women like Toyia don't have to think before they speak. They just are comfortable with doing it. Okay, I'm sorry. I promise to go back on target.
No, I love that you brought this up, Dawn. I do. I think you brought up this really important issue, because we can talk about mentorship, we can talk about representation and how wonderful it is that women like Toyia and Renee have cultures, like you said, that have supported their natural abilities and inclination to be able to achieve what they should be able to achieve. But one thing you're talking about research, we find in research are that those sort of, you hear the word microaggressions a lot, and I don't think people always understand what those mean, but they really are those small little things that are often unintentional, or at least unintentional from the person's perspective who is committing the microaggression, but that doesn't make it hurt any less. And from the person who it's being directed at. And I have found that really one of the things that I've been working on recently is trying to get allies, and I say the word ally in a very broad way, but get maybe co-conspirators. So there's a woman that a professor, that Dr. Ella Bell, who called them, I'm looking for co-conspirators, people who will see when these things are happening the way that I see them and will step in for me. And those can be men, it can be white women with their women of color colleagues in the workplace who see that and will redirect and say, I see that you just said the same thing that Toyia just said a few minutes ago. Is that what you meant? Right? Those sort of moments. And oftentimes, and it's often, my experience has been often men, white men. There's a lot of white men where I work, so that makes sense that it's a lot that happens, is that they don't even understand that they did it, and they're smart and they're caring and they're compassionate, and when you gently redirect that way, they begin to see it, and then they can become co-conspirators too. And I think finding those networks of people, it's not just mentors above you, although that's often great if they have the power to be able to withstand some of the constraints on that, but it's those lateral people who are in the trenches with me, who will see it and step in and say, and even who will pull me aside in the hallway and be like, I see what happens. I don't really know what to do in the moment yet, and I'm working on that, but I see you. And I think there's a spectrum of what we can do, but I love that we're talking about it, because I do think these are the structural issues, and you're swimming in the water that you don't often see, but that doesn't mean that you're not drinking it in and experiencing it and all of that. So I'm glad you took that tangent, Dawn, because I think it's important.
And I'm glad to just be here with a whole bunch of co-conspirators. I tell you, I love that concept, and that's exactly what it is. And one thing that I have to say is, as I've been mentoring young women, particularly who have kind of come up and reached out to me, the one thing that I've told them is that at the end of the day, we have to be our ultimate authentic self. And it has taken me almost 50 years to get to that point, so that I don't always have to point or pause and think about what I'm going to say. And sometimes I say it and then I sit back and kind of laugh in my head, because I know I've said something, kind of drop that bomb in the room and just wait to see what everybody's responses are going to be. But it is so encouraging to have those co-conspirators who are at the table, many of whom do exactly like Beth said. I've been in numerous situations and they'll speak up, or I'll purposely be quiet because I know they expect me to speak up, because I'm supposed to represent all things for all people of color, all students of color, all whatever. And so sometimes I'll sit back on purpose and not say anything and watch as they try to figure it out. And so it is always encouraging, though, to have other women, other co-conspirators who understand the challenges that we face, who are willing to step up and not leave you out there on your silo as you're making that important point. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. I do want to move on a little bit. So switching gears to women leaving and returning to the workforce. So the latest jobs report showed that the overall unemployment rate for women is at 4.2%. And of course, that rate is higher significantly for Black women and Latinas. So what's keeping women out of the workforce and what's needed for them to return? And I know that's kind of the $1 million question right now. But Dawn, you mentioned childcare earlier, and I know that that's a big one. Do you want to start us off by talking about that?
Sure. So I reached out to Director Townsend at the Iowa Workforce Development last summer and asked her for some numbers about women's workforce participation. I learned that we've lost almost 54,000 women in Iowa's workforce in 2020. We know that some of those reasons are because of childcare. The interesting thing is that it's the age group between 45 and 54 that we've seen the greatest excesses. We were a little worried because we thought it might be younger because it would be the young moms with the kiddos. But we thought about it. We said, remember, women are delaying having babies now. So we're seeing, a lot of those 40-year-olds with little kids. We're also in that, yep. And we're also in that double generational, they're taking care of kids, but they're also taking care of parents. And COVID really impacted parents. So it's all that caregiving that we're dealing with. And then when you have a shortfall of childcare, and then you have childcare businesses that have to close, and now they're trying to come back and they're in worse financial peril than they were prior to COVID. The issue just keeps getting compounded. And until we can address the childcare shortage, the childcare workforce shortage, women are going to stay out of the workforce because they have to have someone to watch their kids. If there isn't someone to watch their kids, they can't work. Not only can they not work, they can't go to school. They can't take advantage of training and opportunities to advance their careers. They can't take advantage of apprenticeships that are out there. I mean, their hands are really tied until there's childcare. Just an FYI, I don't know if any of you saw that the governor did announce yesterday her childcare task force report. It's a wonderful start. There are some great things in there. I highly encourage you all to check it out. I know at the Women's Foundation, we're going to try really hard to align our work moving forward to address these issues so we can get women back into the workforce, because ultimately that's what we're all about. We want women in this state to be successful. We want them to be economically successful. And to do that, they have to be able to work.
Yeah. Renee, I'll turn it to you, bringing in your perspective as the president and CEO of Veridian. What do you think is keeping women out of the workforce, and then what could be done to help bring them back?
Yeah, I think what Dawn mentioned is a significant factor, right? Because if you can't find childcare that you trust and that, or maybe you just can't find it at all, that's definitely going to force you to make some really difficult decisions with your family. And you're going to have to decide who stays home and how are we going to manage this. So I think that is at the top of the list of things that we need to get figured out for all employers and for women and families in general, right? I think there are some other things too that we can do as employers, making sure that women see a path forward, a path to success, a path to a really successful career. And I think it starts with having an inclusive environment and making sure that they feel like we want them at the table, because that's in fact what we want at Veridian Credit Union. We want you to be at the table where decisions are being made. And if people feel a sense of belonging and they feel like they want to be there and they want to contribute, and make us a better organization, I think that really increases your emotional connection to your employer. And so then we need to work through that whole, like I started off the conversation with, that whole synergy between work and life, and how do you do both and do both successfully. I think that will just be something that we as employers need to work through, right? So we need to look at what benefits we're providing, and how do we provide benefits that make your life a little bit easier. When you're here at work, what can we take off of your plate? What benefits can we provide to get some of those things maybe accomplished that you can't get accomplished while you're here with us during the day? How can we provide you a flexible work arrangement or schedule so that you feel like you don't have to always choose, that we can create an environment where you can balance all of those priorities? I think there are a lot of things that we could do as employers to also make sure that your benefit package in general is really rich, so that we're providing support for your families, and so that you feel that you are contributing to the family well-being by being here, but then we can also give you your time to spend with them to make your family life even that much more rich. So yeah, I think there are a lot of things that employers really have to take a step back and look at. What does that work environment look like? And it might look a lot different than what it has in the past, right? So if we're looking at coming back in a hybrid model, what works best for families? What works best for schedules? How can you work from home some, and how can you work from the office some, to really create the best of both worlds for the employer and the woman looking to really contribute to her community and contribute to her family, and make both a priority.
Yeah. Toyia, I'll turn to you. You're in the unique position where you're working with students who maybe haven't entered the full-time workforce yet. I guess what sorts of things are students right now looking for in an employer? What are they expecting out of an employer to keep them in their job or role?
Well, it's actually just what Renee mentioned, the flexibility. And that's why we had to really stop and take a look. Numerous employers are moving to hybrid or remote work or telework. And that wasn't something we were thinking about even 5 years ago. I remember at my previous employer, she just simply did not believe in it. And she said, as long as I am president and CEO, we will never work from home. 2 years later, the pandemic hit, and I kind of want to call her up and say, I told you not to say never, But students are now looking for that flexibility as well as they're applying for many jobs. They want the flexibility. They want to know that they'll be able to do things, as we all know. And it's actually exciting to watch, is that everyone seems to be want to be an entrepreneur now. And so people have these businesses on the side, and they want to be able to manage that and have time to dedicate to whatever that passion, that business, that nonprofit they may be working on the side, as well as maintain full-time employment. And so what's the flexibility to do that? Also, I have to comment on what Dawn said earlier, and I appreciate the fact that it's not just childcare, it's caregiver for all, particularly when you're looking at women of color. Culturally, we do not just take care of our immediate or nuclear family. We take care of aunts and cousins and grandmothers and all these kinds of things. And so being aware of the multiple hats that we wear, even internally with our immediate family and external family, that weighs into it. But I really think that it's important that we create these environments, as Renee said, that are inclusive. And for some people, inclusive environments also mean flexible. It means you understand the different hats that I wear. It means you understand that I have multiple irons in the fire, and I'm going to need some support. And I'm going to do my work here, and I'm going to do a good job here. But you are aware of the fact that there are other things that pull on me as well. And you're going to be supportive, and you're going to be flexible on that. And that's what I'm hearing from our students. I met with a nice young woman. She's a senior getting ready to graduate, and her major is entrepreneurship, but she's not quite sure what that thing is that she wants to develop, or what that business is that she wants to launch. And so she's been taking advantage of internships, which I encourage and I thought was so great. And then she said, well, I don't know what I want to do. So I feel like I'm just going to do like 5 or 6 internships at the same time. And I'm like, slow down. I don't think I would recommend that. But, for this generation in particular, they like having their hands in different areas. They like trying out new things. And so I think as employers and as leaders, we have to be aware of that and have an understanding of what this new generation looks for, not only in life, but particularly in employment. and how we can support them as they navigate this space.
Yeah. And then lastly, Beth, I know that a lot of your research lies in work-life management. And, you know, the latest Lean In McKinsey Women in the Workplace report showed that women are more burned out now than they were a year ago, and they're significantly more burned out than men. And I can only assume that managing your family and your work at the same time might have something to do with that. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
I do. You know, it has been a very unique year. And I think that I mentioned earlier the idea of separating out these individual, interpersonal, institutional factors. And I'll say number one of the main things that we're seeing, and we're seeing this with our students too, as someone who teaches students, we're seeing burnout among our students, we're seeing burnout among faculty, burnout just every woman I know seems to be managing these issues or not, right? Managing those issues. And I think there's a few reasons here and a few things that we need to consider. The first is we have experienced as a community a collective trauma, and we don't always talk about that. We talk about, oh, well, who has lost someone in their family, or how have you, your experiences and your ambitions struggled because of lockdowns. But we haven't talked about the collective trauma that we've all gone through together during this, of pain, communities who have suffered, kids within schools where they have lost teachers, right? This is a community sort of thing. And that is a burden that we all bear together, regardless of what your individual experiences have been. And I think we need to respect that's going to take a collective healing the same way that we've gone through this collective issue. But I also think I come back to this idea of control so often, because burnout isn't just stress. We're all stressed. We all have complex, conflagrations of I have time and I have this limited amount of time and all of these things that are demands on it. Burnout for me is more than just stress. It's really a bone exhaustion where you're doing the same things and nothing is changing. You have no control over the things that are changing. And so I think it's important that we distinguish between those things, because burnout can feel very, very squishy. It's this thing how do we even address it? I don't even know what we're supposed to do. I mean, stress, how am I supposed to tell people to just not be stressed out? Well, I think that's the wrong conversation. It's not just, well, don't be stressed out, or don't have conflicts. We've always had conflicts where we have a limited amount of time and lots of things that we have to do. And so I really think the more that we can try to trust women enough to give them some control back over the way they do their job. The young woman that Toyia talked about, what sort of control can we give her to feel like she's in the driver's seat for what she wants to do? How can we say, well, maybe you get a choice between where you want to work or how you want to work? How do we give women and trust them enough that maybe they know what's best for them, and I can give you resources to be able to do that? I think that is our the biggest weapon that we can wield against the epidemic of burnout that we're seeing, is how can we trust women to give them control back over the way they work and the way they live their lives? And I'll ground that in some research. There's an approach towards work called the results-only workplace environment. And it's not just a kind of consultant speak for how people do work, but there's actually a lot of sociological research behind it. And the idea is kind of what Toyia was saying, which is I'll do the work that I need to do. I will deliver on my goals because I am a professional and I know, but you have to trust me to know the best way to do that I can achieve those goals. And really having employers think not just about how you do work, this effort, which is often much easier to see. I see you sitting in your desk, you are here, checkpoint for you, versus I really need to think about the results of work. What do I need you to deliver for me? What is performance in this workplace? And that's complex and it's difficult work for organizations, but it's also groundbreaking, because then it gives this control back to employees to say, okay, I'll trust you. Here's what I need you to do. And I'll trust that you can know the best way to deliver that. And in that way, you're not just trusting, but you're providing support. And you're giving some control back to employees, particularly women who may felt that they have been just pulled between extremes of, I have no control over where my child does their schoolwork right now, or even if they're in school, I have no control over, seeing my parent who's been stuck in, assisted living that I haven't been able to see, or I have now moved home with me and I'm, caregiving for everyone, or my aunts or my uncles, or I'm far away and I feel guilty about that. Again, I feel like control is one of those really important resources that we often overlook.
Uh, one of the things that we've been really specific in Fearless as we set our goal was that we want to help empower women in work and life. And I think we've talked a lot about that because what happens at work affects us in life. And one of the things that we've seen across the nation is that there are higher rates of domestic violence, which we know disproportionately affects women. There's, mental health issues at play. From an intersectional lens, there's women with disabilities and women of color and LGBTQ folks that are all facing, lots of barriers. So when people are stepping into workplaces or other areas of life, they're bringing their whole selves with them and all of the issues that affect them. So I'm just curious, how can we be supportive and empathetic to know that people are bringing their whole selves into any situation? And Toyia, I'll start with you.
I'm so glad you brought up, in particular, mental health. We have just seen enormous numbers of students seeking mental health support right now in all shapes and forms of it. And interestingly enough, when I've talked to students, they said we've actually started a campaign just this semester because we've seen so many students seeking counseling services, et cetera. And so our Cyclone support campaign is really focused on that. And when we started with our flyers and social media campaign, we didn't say, how's your mental health? Because we know that there's still somewhat of a stigma related to it. We said, are you stressed out? Are you lonely? Are you depressed? And then people said, oh yeah, I am those things. Maybe I do need to call in. Maybe I do need support. So I'm glad that we're having this discussion. But I think that you hit the nail on the head that what we've seen, even looking at our numbers, is not only an increase in people seeking mental health support, but also the severity of the issues that they're struggling with. And a lot of them, yes, have been, could be drawn to correlations with the pandemic, feeling isolated, losing jobs, losing loved ones, all of those things. But it's all the other things that we also have to face. And so I think particularly what we saw on campus is that we were all kind of thrust back in. We were excited to reopen the doors of campus and allow people to come back. And they were excited as well. They talked about it, the energy that they had on the first couple of weeks because they missed their friends so much. Then some anxiety came in because it was like, well, wait a minute. Are things really okay? Are we over? What does this mean? And they started struggling with some of that. And so they started seeing their grades drop. They started seeing different things happening across campus. We are our own little city, I have to tell people. And so sometimes things are going to happen regardless of what we do to plan and prepare. Yes, we have seen sexual assaults take place on campus. Yes, we have seen alerts, and students are seeing them, are like, well, wait a minute. I feel like I didn't know those things when I was in isolation or in quarantine or at home with my parents. I wasn't exposed to some of those things. So kind of being back out in the world has caused some anxiety and stress. And so I think that we have to be cognizant of that when we're dealing with those around us, our employees, our students, et cetera. We're still kind of going through this weird period of time right now where some people feel comfortable and some people don't. And so it's taxing and it's weighing on us. And we're not only thinking about our own individual selves, but going back to the conversation we have over and over again, we're thinking about our families. We're thinking about our kids who are in school and are they being exposed to things and what's happening to them. We're thinking about our spouses and partners as well. And so we find ourselves in these strange places that often have an impact on us. And sometimes we feel like we don't have an opportunity to break down, to lose it sometimes, to cry, to do those things because we're the ones that are so busy trying to control and hold it all together. And so this is just my plug for women of all ages, races, professions, et cetera, to reach out, to seek help when it's needed. I think that we've always been, the leaders and I can do all things and I'm superwoman and I can hold it all together. But there comes a breaking point for all of us at some point in time. And so I hope we can use this discussion as a way to encourage women who do need help in a variety of ways. If it's mental help, if it's trying to get out of a domestic violence experience, that they'll seek help and they'll feel empowered to do so after hearing this conversation.
Dawn, what would you add about that empathy piece and just how we treat and other people, whether as a leader or just as a member of a team?
I was listening to Toyia and I thought, and I wanted to add on, and it's okay to ask for help. because I think that's the other thing. We're strong. We can do this. Everything's okay. We'll get through it. Sometimes we can't. We have to admit that, and we have to go and ask for help. And we shouldn't be judged because we have to have help. We shouldn't be looked differently at because we have to ask for help. It's okay. We call that reframing the message in social change work, and looking at systemic work and long term. I think we also need to think that, you know what, let's reframe the message around mental health, which is what Toyia said they started to do when they were sending out those flyers. I think that will help us make it be okay, is when we also look at reframing it.
And Renee, what would you say about, from a leadership perspective, of establishing that empathy within a culture?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I love the comments that have already been made. And one of the things that we've done to create that culture of it's okay, ask for help, is we've implemented training for employees on mental health and stress management. But we've also done another set of training for managers. So managers know how to respond when employees have concerns, or when they bring an issue to them and they don't know where to go, or they don't know how to address it, or who can help. Making sure that our managers are armed with data and resources, whether it's EAP or whatever that might be, just so people know they have someone to talk to. I think that's been a huge step forward. And we've continued to do diversity, equity, and inclusion training, right? I think it's important to have an inclusive work environment and to know how to respond to questions people may have, or situations they may be dealing with outside of work as well, because we bring our whole self to work. So whatever's impacting them outside of our walls definitely comes to work with them. And we want to make sure that it's a welcoming environment, and that we hear them, and that we can point them in the right direction, that they feel like there's always somebody that's available to listen and hopefully help them work through whatever situation may be on their plate.
Beth, anything you'd add to that?
I mean, I don't need to, but I will. I think it's really been an important opportunity for us to be bold and to be forward thinking and to be inclusive in our thinking, what has been going on. And I love the new conversation about mental health. At the Healthier Workforce Center here at the University of Iowa, which I'm affiliated with, we have been working through a suicide prevention program that has been rolled out to construction workers across the Midwest, and it's been very, very successful. And it's called You Okay? And essentially it starts with just that question. And there are buttons and stickers that direct folks to the National Suicide Hotline. And it's been really successful because it's been just destigmatizing the asking of the question. Are you okay? Are you all right? And it's okay if you're not. And here's a resource for you. And I may not be a counselor. I'm not warm and fuzzy. I can't help you through this, but I can show you that it's okay to find help through it. And I think if you are not in a culture like Renee's, right, or like Toyia's that has that sort of support, you can still get help from somewhere, and you can still, as an individual, be supportive, and you can find those resources. And there are free resources and there are helpful resources that you can show yourself to be an ally if it's about diversity, equity, inclusion issues, to be a listening ear if it's about caregiving sorts of issues or mental health. There are things that we can do individually to support one another. And there are things we can do if we're in a position of power within our workplaces to make the asking of support less stigmatized, but also to train people to provide that support. And one of the things that I think, have seen over the last year and a half is how intertwined mental health and well-being and wellness is with productivity and performance. It's not just work and life are inextricably linked, but well-being and performance is inextricably linked. And the companies that recognize that and the individuals that recognize that moving forward have the opportunity to create change and to create an equitable and positive, hopeful future, I think, for women across the state.
This has been really good conversation. Lots of great points brought up. It feels tough to kind of wrap things up here, but I'm going to ask each of you to share one final thought, and if you could boil it down to a couple of sentences, and we'll go around and talk about one thing that each of you are hopeful about when it comes to women's empowerment. And so I'll give you a second to think on that. And I just want to, again, encourage everyone listening and watching to stay involved with Fearless. We encourage you to invite friends and colleagues, because it takes everyone to accomplish our goal of empowering women and having key discussions about gender issues like these. So you can learn more about Fearless at fearlessbr.com. And with that, let's go to Renee for your final thought on something that you're hopeful about.
Well, I'm extremely hopeful that women will stay engaged in the workforce or get back into the workforce. We need women at the table. We need those decision makers. We need that perspective. We always try to reflect the communities that we serve, and women are a huge part of that. And so for us to do our job better, serve people better, be a better organization, we need women. So I'm really hopeful that people will come back to the workforce or stay in the workforce and work with their employer to find that flexibility and maybe that harmony that will keep them engaged and keep them extremely happy moving forward.
Toyia.
I'm hopeful for the same. I'm hopeful to continue to see women shatter glass ceilings, rise to the occasion. But for me, I'm hopeful that we'll start seeing a lot more diversity of women. And I have to always give this caveat. When I say diversity, I'm not even talking just about racial and ethnic diversity. I'm talking about diversity of thought, diversity of belief, socioeconomic diversity, religious diversity. I think that all those things contribute to much richer conversations and help us when we're struggling with some major issues and things and problems that we're trying to solve. And so I'm encouraged and I'm hopeful that we'll start seeing more women sitting at the table. We are some of the best and brightest, creative, smart people on the planet. And so having us in these leadership positions not only benefit the industry and the business, but I think it benefits the world. And so I'm hopeful that we'll start seeing women take their rightful place at the table. And as someone often says, I've heard it numerous times, if you don't have a seat at the table, build your own. And so I'm encouraged and I'm hopeful that women will step back up in their proper place.
Dawn.
I'm going to go a little different for you. I'm really hopeful and excited over the fact that people are now starting to see the barriers to women's economic success as economic issues, as workforce issues, not just a woman's issue. And by reframing that, we are now we're starting to see good solutions. We're starting to see everybody coming together to address it. I think we're really starting to see and appreciate the role that women are playing in the workforce and the role that we need them. And we're going to do what we can to help them.
Beth?
I love this. I love ending with a hopeful, bright note. I'm an optimist, and this just is going to be a wonderful end to this session. I am also hopeful. We have been through so much, and women in particular have shouldered so much of the burden that we have collectively experienced throughout the pandemic. And I'm hopeful that women can take these experiences that we've had and recognize that we can learn from them and we can have insights that can change the world. And I know that sounds perhaps pie in the sky, but what is your world? Your world is your family. Your world is your workplace. Your world is the people that you see every day. You can change that. And you absolutely can take what you have learned and you can craft a future that is more just, more equitable, more flexible, more all the things that you want, because we have been through all of this together. Look at the women on this panel and all the things that you have been able to do and with what has been given to you, and imagine when we have crafted an even more just and equitable future, all the wonderful things that will be able to happen then. So go forth and conquer. And I can't wait to read about you on a panel in 20 years.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to all four of you for speaking and everyone for tuning in.